The Ethera Sanctuary was designed for aesthetics, not survival. Curved glass corridors, floating crystalline archways, zero choke points. Jackson Thorne hated it immediately. He stood at the perimeter of the royal garden, sweat pulling at his fatigue shirt under the estate's tripled artificial gravity. The hegemony guards assumed the high-gravity circuit was the human punishing himself. They were wrong. He was calibrating. He mapped the blind spots while Prince Kalen practiced ceremonial stances on the lawn. 3 drone patrols, 2 overlapping sensor nets, and 1 hidden null Vanguard surveillance optic, tucked into a silver-barked weeping willow. Thorne didn't destroy it. He just memorized its rotation. To the serene hegemony, he was a political token, a beast of burden given a badge. He let them think it. You'll want to hear how this elegant facade shatters. Trust me on that. 30 kilometers above the sanctuary, a stealth frigate drifted in low orbit. Its hull was painted in radar-absorbent Vantablack. Inside the drop bay, 30 null Vanguard operatives locked into grav chutes. No words were spoken aloud. Only encrypted tactical data flashing across tinted visors. Below them, the estate glowed like a beacon of arrogance. The hegemony relied entirely on the Aegis Prime energy grid. Invisible walls of hard light, automated defense turrets, powered armor that amplified a guard's strength tenfold. It was an elegant system, flawless, right up until the moment the grid screamed and died. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. The Vanguard Jumpmaster raised 3 fingers. A red light shifted to green. 30 black shapes fell into the night sky. Down in the sanctuary's subterranean loading bay, a smuggler's crate hit the deck. No hegemony seals. No energy signatures. Thorne signed the datapad and cracked the seal with a pry bar. Inside sat the forbidden fruit, a clandestine field kit. The serene hegemony outlawed kinetic weapons on royal grounds. They were loud, uncivilized. Thorne didn't care. He lifted the heavy, unrefined weight of the old ballistic pistol. It contrasted sharply against the delicate, spun silk fabric of Prince Kalen's ceremonial robes he had seen upstairs. The metallic, rhythmic clack slide of Thorne thumbing subsonic rounds into a cold magazine, a primitive sound that shouldn't exist in a high-tech fortress. He racked the slide, chambered the first round. The heavy click locked into place. An analog salvation sitting quietly in the dark. Commander Vex marched the perimeter of the royal garden. His armor hummed with pristine blue energy. The HUD tracked 100 microvariables. Temperature, wind speed, biorhythms of the 3 royal children sleeping 2 floors above. Then, the sky tore open. It wasn't an explosion. It was a localized atmospheric compression. An EMP blackout of catastrophic yield. The blue hum of Vex armor died instantly. His HUD went black. The floating crystalline archways crashed to the marble floors, shattering into a million shards. The hard light shields evaporated. Vex tried to raise his rifle. The servos in his armor were dead. A 1-ton suit of powered enhancement became a 1-ton coffin of dead weight. He couldn't lift his arms. He couldn't move his legs. The sanctuary was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. In the silence that followed, 30 soft impacts hit the roof. The loading bay lights snapped off. Emergency klaxons tried to spool up, then choked on dead circuitry. Total blackout. Thorne didn't freeze. He didn't check a wrist comm that no longer functioned. He dropped into a low crouch, letting his eyes dilate. The silence above told him everything. No repulsor lifts. No energy lances. The hegemony's elegant defense was gone. He reached into the crate and pulled out a pair of quad-lens thermal optics. Analog batteries. Chemical light sticks. He strapped the tactical rig over his chest. 3 magazines of subsonic rounds. 2 flashbangs. 1 8-inch combat knife. He engaged the optics. The pitch-black room exploded into green and white thermal outlines. He was the only thing moving. The hunt had started. Thorne sprinted for the stairwell, his boots making zero sound on the concrete. The Null Vanguard breached the upper solarium without triggering a single alarm. There were no alarms left to trigger. They moved in perfect synchronization. Thermal masking cloaks hid their heat signatures from standard hegemony scans. Not that the scans were active. They bypassed the frozen, trapped forms of the royal guards in the garden. Vex could only watch through his dead visor as black shapes flowed past him like water. They didn't bother slitting throats. Ammo was cheap, time was expensive. They converged on the central spiral staircase leading down to the royal chambers. The objective was simple: terminate the bloodline. They moved down the steps, raising suppressed energy spitters that ran on internal chemical batteries. No resistance, no variables, just a dark hallway. The Null Vanguard flowed through the upper solarium like black water. They were ghosts in the machine, programmed for maximum efficiency. Without the hegemony's artificial light, the opulence of the sanctuary became a labyrinth of useless wealth. Statues of former sovereigns watched blindly as the assassins bypassed the frozen, trapped forms of the royal guards. Commander Vex was still locked inside his dead-powered armor, eyes wide behind a blacked-out visor, forced to watch the strike team move toward the royal suites. They didn't bother slitting his throat. Ammo was cheap. Time was expensive. They breached the heavy oak doors of the nursery with a silent plasma cutter, raising their suppressed energy spitters. 2 floors down, Thorn was already moving. He had crossed the high-gravity training circuit in seconds, kicking open the nursery doors just as the EMP hit. Now, he shoved Prince Kalen down the narrow stone steps of the servant stairwell. The reinforced cellar door loomed somewhere in the pitch black below. The youngest child, Princess Alara, wept silently, clinging desperately to Thorn's tactical rig. Her small hands gripped the webbing where his spare magazines sat. Thorn's thermal optics painted the cold stone in stark shades of green and white. He could see the residual heat of the children's panic. Every breath they took bloomed like a flare in the lens. The Vanguard squad leader kicked the sliced nursery doors inward. Beds were empty, blankets thrown aside. The heat signatures were already fading into the ambient chill of the blackout. The leader tapped his helmet, switching from standard thermal to microscopic kinetic tracking. A faint trail of disturbed dust and scuffed marble led directly toward the subterranean servant tunnels. He signaled with 2 fingers. The squad fanned out. From the rear of the formation, a handler unsealed a heavy stasis pod. They deployed the asset. A Grendel-class Ravager, gene-spliced for confined slaughter, crawled out onto the marble. It tasted the stale air, its secondary hearts pumping combat stimulants into its bloodstream. Thorn stopped at the bottom landing. The heavy, unrefined weight of the old ballistic pistol dragged at his hip, a stark contrast against the delicate, spun silk fabric of Kalen's ceremonial robes as the boy stumbled into him. "Get inside," Thorn whispered, his voice a gravelly hum. He handed the older prince a discarded Vanguard blaster, dead from the EMP, just for psychological comfort. He locked the children behind the heavy ironwood door. The Vanguard thought the darkness was their ally. They were wrong. It was his. Thorn turned back to the stairwell, letting his heart rate drop to a steady, predatory rhythm. The persistence hunter was awake. Thorn anchored himself behind a marble support pillar in the lower hall. The cellar door was exactly 5 meters behind his back. Above him, the faint scratching of tactical boots echoed down the stone shaft. 3 Vanguard operatives descended the stairs, their movements precise, their night vision goggles emitting a faint phosphor glow that Thorn's thermals picked up as bright halos. Thorn exhaled, letting the air bleed from his lungs to steady his hands. He pulled the trigger. The subsonic round cycled with a muted, rhythmic thud that barely disturbed the dead air, tearing through the Vanguard's advanced, but now unshielded, composite armor with absolute kinetic lethality, dropping 3 assassins before they even realized the shadows were shooting back. They fell like heavy stones. Silence crashed back into the corridor. Then, a low, guttural roar shook the dust from the ceiling. The Ravager. It didn't use optics. It hunted entirely by smell and vibration, and the scent of fresh blood had just sent it into a frenzy. The massive beast bounded down the stairwell in a blur of motion, crushing the dead Vanguard operatives under its heavy, spiked claws. Thorn tracked its glowing thermal signature. The creature lunged, a terrifying mass of dense muscle and interlocking bone plate armor. Thorn didn't waste his ammo. The caliber was too small to penetrate that biological tank. He sidestepped at the last possible microsecond, letting the beast crash headlong into the marble pillar. He knew the Ravager's bone-plate armor was nearly impenetrable from the front, but its evolutionary biology required rapid thermal venting during high-stress combat, leaving a microscopic gap at the base of the cranium where the spinal column connected to the brainstem. Jackson Thorne drove an 8-inch combat knife into the base of the Grendel-class Ravager's skull just as the cellar door gave way to the darkness. The beast's nervous system severed instantly. It collapsed into a dead, heavy heap, its momentum carrying it to slide to a halt inches from the splintered wood. Thorne stood over the carcass, his chest heaving, the analog knife dripping in the dark. Hours later, emergency lights flickered on, illuminating the carnage. Official registry updates would soon bypass political tradition, naming a human the first non-hegemony Aegis Prime after the security transcripts leaked. But down in the ruined cellar, Thorne ignored the blaring sirens. He sat beside the sleeping heirs, wiping dried blood from his knuckles. Resting on his knee was the old ballistic pistol, no longer a primitive mockery, but the undeniable anchor of their survival.